Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
He holds a fixed-term position as chair in software engineering at the University of Clausthal.
Giving you a hard time with all those names.
It's given my medical condition, yes, it is. He's published papers on a number of different topics in software engineering, including software process modeling and simulation, software reliability, extreme programming, and software inspections. And today he'll share with us his work on the FreeSoDA project.
Thanks. As you probably have noticed by now, this is the title slide. It doesn't really have a title, it has a logo. So let's decode the logo. There's a small free in the top left corner, and you probably can read the soda a little bit better. So you probably understand the free. It's for free. Good. But what's the soda thing about? Well, the original idea was to build a thing which is called a source documentation archive. It was a very simple idea. We wanted to enable users to use the internet to attach textual comments to big source file hierarchies. Hello, Rota, right? 20,000 files, everyone's working on the Rota sources, everyone has an idea, everyone learns about the sources, and would like to share his ideas, his experiences, his insights with other people working on the same source code. So just let them attach textual comments. Good idea, isn't it? And every other user should be able to see new comments in a newsticker-like fashion. So if you type something in, add a comment to a certain source file, someone else sitting in Germany would see, a new comment. Let's read it. And the whole idea was to support the Rota research community, and this could, of course, be used for other purposes as well. So we started working on this project, and after a while, it turned into FreeSoDA for several reasons. First of all, we easily figured that it should be easy to do. Instead of just adding text to source files, you could link any kind of document with any kind of document, like adding pictures, linking pictures, adding PDFs, whatever you want. So why restrict ourselves just to textual comments and source code? That was one step. Another step was that we soon figured if you would have a nice user interface, it would not scale using browsers. No way, it's just too slow generating all the graphics all the time. So why not use web services for that and use a rich client? Right now, it's a totally different project, right? It's a much larger scope. We also wanted to seamlessly notify clients about changes in the database. So if someone would add a document or add a link, would anyone else who is working on the database right now get a notification somehow? The best way would be just to make his display change, make this new document appear. That was the idea. And doing all this on web services turned out to be a challenge. This is what it looks like now. So we have implemented a big part of the project, and we're in the process of building a database for Rota. And as you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen, you have different kinds of documents which are linked to each other. So you probably can see that there are JPEGs and PDFs and Word documents, and these are linked. And these links have been created manually. So someone put a certain document, a JPEG for example, into the database and linked it with some other document, having some semantics in mind. On the right-hand side, you have a navigation pane, which is Windows Explorer-like. So you can navigate through the database, right? Make it easier not to get lost. So what we have right now are a bunch of features. I've listed a few important ones. Well, the system allows you to create links between semantically related documents, and whatever the semantics are you have in mind. You can draw any link between any two kinds of documents. And you can specify sort of link types to give some meaning to the links if someone else looks at the database. We allow for filtering of what is shown on the screen. On the server side, we have what we call views, and on the client side, we have something which we call styles. We also offer root documents for navigation. So there is some person like a project administrator, project manager, and the project manager designates certain files as being, or documents as being root documents, and they would show up always. You cannot get rid of the root documents. This is sort of a skeleton for navigating through the database. And we also had in mind that we should be able to protect documents against deletion and overwriting. Let me explain this a little bit closer. The whole idea was to support communities like the Rota research groups. So we have a very open community in mind. We want people to be able to share documents, insights easily. But still we need a little bit of protection. So we have the idea of a document belonging to an owner, a link belonging to an owner. We have the idea of groups. And you cannot just delete a document which has been stored in the database by someone else, except you are in the same group, right? But basically, it's an owner-based thing to protect files against deletion and overwriting. You can look at the contents of the documents as soon as you have access to the database. But you cannot change the contents, you cannot delete the document unless you are the owner of the document. So it's a minimal protection in an open environment, in a friendly environment. I was thinking about giving a demo, but striking was too risky not using my own laptop. So here are a few screenshots instead. Adding a document and a link is really easy. What you do is you click on an existing document in the database, and you drag it and drop it somewhere else on the screen. And then a menu pops up. I hope you can read it. It's Insert Link Document. Right? So if you click on Insert Link Document, you're going to see the next screen. It's going to ask you for certain description details about the document, and most important, where to get your hands on the document. So this is in the middle of this window, Browse. This is the path where you can find the document. And after you finish with this dialog, the document is going to be uploaded into the database. And it's going to be linked to the document with which you started in the database when dragging and dropping. So you can add a name, you can add a document type, you can say, well, this better be a root document. And you can also specify similar information for the link which you created using the third tab, seen on the screen. So it's pretty easy. It's also interesting to see that you have different document types, and these are not what you expect it to be. It's not a doc or a PDF or a JPEG. So these document types are at a higher level. And the types available have to be defined by the project manager. And he declared that you have articles, code documentation, logos, photographs. You can have Ottos, Millers, Smiths, whatever you want to. And they're not tied to the document type by looking at the extension. Right? So you can have a description being a Word document or a PDF, and it's all going to get the document type of a code documentation. Right? And the user specifies the type when storing the document. So we're introducing a different level of semantics in the system. Using those metadata information like owner and document type, you or the project administrator can define views. And views filter what the client sees on the screen from the database. And here I've defined an articles only view, which would show you only documents of document type article. So you just get to see part of the database. And you might have noticed that all the JPEGs are gone. Okay, you just have GIFs, PDFs, and docs. And all these documents have been specified as document type article, or they are root documents and show up for that reason, because root documents are always shown on the screen. So the hard part is to define those views properly. That's the duty of the project administrator, and the ordinary users just use it. The normal users have services logging on and off the project, opening and closing a view, inserting or deleting a document or a link, editing a link or a document description, downloading a document, and triggering a refresh. So if you have the idea that your screen is not up to date, you can trigger a refresh manually instead of waiting for the next notification from the server. Just to give you a little bit more of the flavor of the system, this is the dialog you get when you connect to the server, and there's not much you need to know in order to connect. You need to know the URL of the FreeSoDA server, and you need to have a login and a password. And that's going to be created by the project administrator. Downloading a document or viewing the contents of a document is easy as well. You just click on the right, you just position the mouse on top of the document, and you click on the right button, and you get this context menu and ask for open document. And this is the point where the extension comes into play. If your system is configured properly and you open a doc, then Word will pop up and show you the contents of the document. So the extensions are being used in the system, but just for the purpose of showing you the contents of the document in a proper way. We also have services for administrators, like creating and deleting users, creating projects, defining user groups, and assigning roles like manager or guest or normal user, defining document and link types, and defining views based on those types. And all these administrative tasks can be easily performed by the client. This is a requirement which I put on the students. I don't want to fool around with SQL databases or whatever. I don't want to hack that stuff. Give me a nice client interface for that. For example, this is one of the menus you get to see only if you're the FreeSoDA administrator. So FreeSoDA administrator is sort of the big boss. That's the person who defines projects. And then you can delegate certain project administration things to the project managers. So you can manage user system roles, you can create user accounts, delete them, lock them, and you can define projects. And you do this using the same client as is being used by the normal users, except for the fact that this menu is not seen by a normal user. It just shows up if you logged in as a FreeSoDA administrator. And you see a similar menu if you log in as a project administrator. Well, this was sort of the fun part. Now comes a little bit about the hard part of the whole project. As SOAP is stateless, we needed to implement sessions and transactions ourselves. This is also part of the research being done in the project. The project started more than 2 years ago. So we were really curious to see how we would be able to implement things like sessions using web services. That was new. Nobody knew how to do it. We didn't even have drafts for proposals for the web consortium or whatever on top of SOAP. So it was a blank field. So we had to implement all that stuff ourselves and just see how far we would get and where the difficulties are. We also needed this notification scheme because we wanted clients to be updated about new documents from time to time on a regular basis without the client or the user having to do anything. So we needed a scheme for that. And again, we're working in a stateless environment. We also needed caching to get performance. We needed the ability to add file trees to a document database, like the rotor files, those 17,000, 18,000 files in a hierarchy. We wanted to add this just with a mouse click, not by hand. And we also needed to fool around with layout algorithms to find interesting ways to present the document database to the user so that you could actually navigate in the system. To share some of the solutions with you, we defined our own message format, pretty simple. It's documented in a paper. And this message format would include, for example, a session ID, a transaction number, which is generated by the server and has to be used by the client with his next request. We needed to store all the state of the session in a SQL database. It's all done in the server. As I used to work with Walter Tichy for a number of years now, I carry the virus of design patterns. So from that perspective, it's no surprise to see that I wanted to mimic the observer design pattern to solve the notification problem. We used a two-level caching scheme in the server. We also used caching in the client, and we also transmit deltas only. So if the client asks for an update, he sends a timestamp to the server, and the timestamp is being used in the server to compute the delta between the current state of the database and the state which the client knows about. And then only the delta is transmitted. We're also able now to add what we call external archives to the database. And one example is a full directory tree. So we have a sort of a document type, something similar to a document type of an archive, and we can add whole archives in the same way as we add single documents. The only restriction is that this is not allowed to normal users. This has to be done by the project administrator. So we have archive directory. We can add zip files, which means not only uploading the zip file itself, but actually creating all the file hierarchy which sits inside the zip archive and have it sitting inside the SODA database now. And the links are being created automatically. So we just reflect the file structure sitting inside the zip archive in the FreeSoDA database. We're also working on adding wikis. We're not really happy with the idea of adding the whole web, means HTML. So of course you can upload a single web page, but you're not allowed to add a web page as an external archive, which would mean importing the whole internet into the FreeSoDA database. That's not what we had in mind. We're also in the process of connecting to version control systems. We're having a little bit of trouble with CVS these days. It's a little bit too old-fashioned. But we're doing well with other source, with other version control systems. We also are able to connect to mail archives, to news groups, and things like that. By the way, this is all being done by one of my graduate students. He's sitting in the back. Say hello to Andreas. He's doing all the hard implementation work. I'm just doing the marketing stuff. Okay, so these external archives are really exciting. They bring also new research problems like how can you handle a big external archive? How do you present a big external archive to a user? Right, you're going to double or triple the size of your database just by adding one of these archives. And we're also playing around with certain layouters. We have a very simple one. It's called a cycle layouter, which works surprisingly well. And we're also working with a spring layouter, which produces interesting results from time to time. And I'll show you a few screenshots later on. So another interesting thing where we really sort of had to give up on the idea of sticking to web services is these notifications. In order to implement notifications based on web services alone, we would have to run a web server on each client, right? Because our FreeSoDA server must somehow contact the client to tell him, well, there's some new information in the database. And how to do this without knowing a web service sitting inside the client. So there are two options. Either you ask that every client runs a full web server, or you come up with a different scheme. And this is what we did. We chose a very simple scheme. We asked the client to open a TCP port. This TCP port is made available to the server, and he just sends a very small message update to this TCP port to wake the client up. And then the client uses a regular web service to ask for an update on the server side. So that's the best idea we had how to solve the problem. I'm not really happy with this, but that's the only way it would work without using web services on the client side. And this is the dialog you use on the client side to make this port available. You check the box, automatically listen for view updates. You enter a number of the port, and you better make sure that this port is available through your firewall. If you don't check this box, you don't get automatic notifications from the server. But you can always trigger a view update manually. And this might be a smart thing to do if you have a very low bandwidth connection. You don't want to have these updates all the time. You just want to keep working with the database as it is. Maybe download a document from time to time. You don't need those notifications all the time. You just don't check this box, and you're doing fine. If you feel in need of getting an update, you just trigger it manually. This is the dialog you get if you add an external archive. You need to be a project manager in order to be allowed to do so. You can see we have directories, mail accounts, news groups, subversion repositories, and we're playing around with wikis. I'm not quite sure whether I'm really willing to allow this, yes or no. Here's some of the fancy layouts we get. This is part of the ROTA database, and I had the machine try out different layouts in a randomized fashion. And this was a layout number 8 or number 9, which I got. And from time to time, you get really interesting layouts by using this randomization scheme. And the screen is sort of split. On the left-hand side, you see a bunch of files being connected with each other, linked with each other. And you can see that the layout is pretty clean. You don't have lines crossing each other, so it looks pretty nice. And the right-hand side of the screen look like that. So for some reason, this layout algorithm sort of separated the view into two parts, the left-hand side and the right-hand side. It was kind of funny. So we're still in the process of figuring out what the best way is to present certain views to the user. I consider this one of the major research challenges, after all, in this project. Right, now that we have the basic infrastructure running, the question is how to use it properly, how to make it easy on the user to use a database like this, a big one, with lots of links. It's more complicated than just browsing the web. Here's another one which you might like. This is the cycle layout. Link depth is 3 or 4. So you have marked one document, this one here, as sort of being the root node at this point in time. And then you add all the files around this one up to a depth of 3 or 4. I find this nice. I like it. And that's a very simple algorithm. By the way, this was developed by another student of mine as part of his intermediate thesis. Here's another one. You can already see that as soon as the number of documents increases, largely increases, it's difficult to present all these documents in a nice way to the user. So we really have usability problems here that we need to face. So there are more things ahead now. We want to add searching. By searching, I mean searching the contents of the documents, not the names of the documents or the types, no, the contents of the documents, and connect this with something like Microsoft technology in that area, or doing something ourselves. I'm not quite sure how to do it yet now. We also want to add bookmarks, like you have in browsers, to make it easier for the user to start his session again at a certain point where he left the previous session. We promised to Microsoft to write a proxy server for browser access. The solution is pretty straightforward. We're going to write a server which behaves like a client to the real server and generates HTML pages all the time to clients using a browser, but they have to be in the local net. Otherwise, it's not going to give you the performance you need. We probably will have to give up on certain layout algorithms because it's computationally too heavy to do this and generate web pages all the time, transferring these web pages in your local net. So we have to come up with different solutions for the usability problem here. Since I'm doing research with Walter, we are very interested in empirically validating our technology. So I'm aiming at empirical studies of the usability of this. So we're talking about having better users right now, using this and making suggestions how to improve it. And once we're finished with that phase, do large-scale studies of the usability of this, empirical studies. Doing some logging, trying to find out what users actually do with the database, how often they look at the contents of certain documents, are there hotspots, and does this information help to make the usability better, like presenting those hotspots in a different way, highlighting them in some way. Sooner or later, we're going to be forced to implement server replication to get more performance, not just get the documents from one server, but split it up, replicate the server. And we're also in the process of setting up the Rota database, which we promised to do. We already have the Rota reference documents sitting inside the database, and we're in the process of adding information which is contained in the mailing list, like the PISA mailing list, and add more documents to the database. So I think that was the fun part for you. And so far, everything has been for free. Well, that's going to change now. Here's the web page where you can download the client and can download information about all this. This is under rapid development, but the client is there, and the first steps are being illustrated with screenshots, so you can get your client running easily. We have created a guest login for the Rota community database. So that's the server address, username is guest, password is guest. So you can get into the database and look at the documents. You're not allowed to change anything because it's a guest login. But if you want to get a regular login, just send me an email. I'll be happy to provide an account for you. And here comes your duty. Please help us populate the database. The Rota community database, basically this whole project has been set up to support you with your research. Make it easy for you to exchange information about Rota. So we would like to create nodes for each of the Rota RFP1 and RFP2 projects and ask you to populate this with your documents, create links between your documents, your source code, your PDF files, and other files in the database. So help us make this a living thing from a Rota perspective. That's the reason why we created the whole thing. Okay, I'm early as well. Any volunteers?
Why have to use web services instead of .NET remotely?
Instead of what?
Remotely.
Well, it was just a natural transition 2 or 3 years ago, right? We started with the idea of having web browser-based systems. So the next step would be just to try it with web services. We could have used EJB instead, sure, or any other technique. So it was just a research experience, try to find out what to do if you want to use web services for that. After all, it was a research project. Go ahead.
And what happens when you have hundreds or thousands of users and millions of nodes? You will have to implement some kind of collaborative filtering because there will be many documents, perhaps some of them are irrelevant or plainly wrong. So the user should have the opportunity to see the good documents and
the good stuff.
You plan to implement this kind of filtering, or?
Yeah, we have 2 ways of addressing this. I'm not sure yet whether this will be sufficient in the future. But the idea is to have those views so you can filter what is shown on the screen. So you don't have to look at the whole database. You as a user can select one of the predefined filters and look at just the files or the documents which are relevant to, I don't know, your research project, for example. Right? We could create a group for your research project, add a certain document type for your research project, and define a filter which would show another user just the files or the documents belonging to your research project. So that's one way to address the explosion problem as far as the size of the database is concerned. With respect to the junk, that's the second part of your question, I guess.
I could add a document
Yeah.
that is plainly wrong.
Which is plainly wrong, but you see, it's an open community thing. So we expect people to be sort of conservative about what they add to the database and think about it twice before they add all kinds of preliminary files to the database. So it's not open to the public, it's open to the project community, in this case the ROTA community. So we expect to be able to send you an email, well, you have added 1,000 files lately, are all these files really necessary, or well, that's just sort of an accident. So we expect to be able to get in touch with the people on a personal basis to keep that database pretty clean. So we're not thinking about doing anything about the contents of the database except for addressing you, contacting you if something seems to go wrong. So it's all a cooperative thing. It's not like a wiki. Sure.
To that point, though, Amazon.com, for example, suggests a couple of different mechanisms for a community, if not regulating junk content, then at least providing some recognition mechanism. And one is obviously the way people score the subject. But even on individual comments, there's an opportunity for any other reviewer to say, did you find this comment helpful? And it provides a general sense of that possibly could be supported by filtering tools or search tools, let's say.
Absolutely.
Do you contemplate the inclusion of some sort of automatic community-driven mechanism like that would at least provide additional criteria for searching or filtering that wouldn't require an editorial voice, but would allow some level of meritocracy to be recognized in the data? I mean,
Sounds like a topic for another PhD, right? So we did not contemplate about this right now, but it might be needed in the future. If you look at wikis, it's astonishing to see that this self-control mechanism of people being able to add pages but also delete other people's pages seems to work pretty well, for certain wikis at least. So if someone adds junk, someone else will kick it out pretty soon. So yes, from a social perspective, this is interesting research, and I'm not quite sure what to do in the future, but it might end up that we are forced to establish a scheme like this one, or even 2 or 3 schemes in a row. But this has nothing to do with the basic infrastructure here. This means filtering the contents, studying the activity, things like that. Okay.